can't hear you if you're talking.
I said hi again.
Oh, hi. Hey, I wanted to show you. So you see, look at my lips. Nothing. Look. Can you see them?
Oh, your color?
Yeah. So in Zoom, you can put on lipsticks. I thought, oh, that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Hi,
I should
Kevin.
put some on, but you can't tell because it's so washed out. Kevin,
Kevin, do you need to know how to put lipstick on when you're on camera?
do it again.
Oh,
So there's some setting, huh? That lets you do that.
yeah. So yeah. You which, so if you do the video, like where it says the video and it's choose virtual background and then it says studio effects. That's where you can fill in your eyebrows. You can give yourself a mustache or a beard.
Hair.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think they have a hair one.
I don't know how realistic that would look.
That would be shocking though, if you like did a call. Yeah. See, little lipstick. Little lipstick.
I put some eyebrows on.
Oh, wow.
Okay, now it won't let me take them off. I'll have to wear them all night.
Oh, yeah.
Let's have some fun.
Fun.
Okay.
Well, hopefully these slides are the right. I don't know what happened to my other slides. I had like Latin flying and when I fixed the sound. So unfragmented or about abolition will be better. It matches.
Think we're gonna have the music this time?
Yes, we will have the music this time. Hi, Kerry. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
We're just having a
Very-
little.
Where are you located right now?
Right now, I am in Michigan, and I have a background on which is our Supreme Court courtroom, which I used during the campaign rather than have my dog or cat walk behind me during the middle of the debate.
Well, when you first came on, I thought that's really where you were. I thought so.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's a nice shot and works out well.
So you
Can you hear
ran,
it?
just so everyone here knows, I wasn't planning on mentioning this in the biography, but you ran as a libertarian for Supreme Court judge in Michigan, right?
Right. Was on the ballot. I did not win. I was able to get about 430,000 votes, but that's not enough in Michigan.
Well, that sounds like a good thing to explain to us once we get everybody on. You have an interesting background, and I'm glad Kevin invited you.
I lived in Trenton, Michigan. Was born and raised downriver.
Oh.
So, and I got out. No, it's pretty. I mean, we moved to Mobile, Alabama, which is a considerable culture difference there.
I'm very familiar with downriver. One of our clients is Riverview,
Oh,
right next door to Trenton, and we also represent Allen Park over the other side. And
all the good softball teams. Those were our rival softball teams. I was a fast pitcher in high school. Yes, Allen Park.
and we have offices in Wyandotte. And
I was born at Wyandotte Hospital.
really,
Mm-hmm.
oh my, right on Biddle or Jefferson there.
Jefferson, yep.
Yeah, drive by it. It's still there too. It's right on the river, as I recall.
Yes, it is right there. All right, we got about 1 minute. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Michelle. Welcome. Good to see faces.
Hey there. Happy Thursday evening, everyone.
Yes, happy Thursday. Okay, I think recording is going, so we will be good to go. Oh my word.
This is Unfragmented, inspired by Colossians. For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Join our book club as we pursue a more consistent Christian life.
So welcome to Unfragmented, where Kevin R Novak and I discuss a book each month. Join us as we explore the cohesions of things believed with things done. It's Thursday, January 19th, 2023. I'm Leigh Bortins. I've been a freedom maximalist since I was 12 years old and found a way to be employed as a newspaper girl when you weren't allowed to do that till you were 14. So I talked the boss into letting me do the job. Kevin, how about you?
Well, I'm Kevin Novak, and I've been a Romans 13 libertarian, and currently I exercise that freedom by participating in a healthcare ministry, and we share money with one another. So that's how I exercise my Romans 13 libertarianism.
Is it a familiar name or just a familiar organization or a small group you're in?
Actually, we participate in Samaritan ministries, and we love it. I love to pray over people and send them little notes and everything. And it's just, I think that's real insurance. It's just from the book of Acts, and it's great. So
that's great. Yeah. So each week we're going to consider a quote in our notable quotable segment. Quotations are generally fragments of longer thoughts. So we want to encourage you to read more from each author to know what they really said. So share the quote for tonight with us, Kevin.
Sure. This is from Christopher Klicka's book, The Heart of Homeschooling. And Christopher Klicka, by the way, was one of the founding attorneys of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And again, this is from The Heart of Homeschooling. He wrote, quote, "Children are never dying souls whom God has entrusted to us," end quote.
And that is so powerful.
It's just great. I use that quote all the time, and I put it on our Christian Voter Guide to Education Law. I've got it all the time. Actually, was going to share the book tonight, but I gave the book away to someone I work with. So that's a good thing, and she'll read through that. But I think one of the things that quote helps me with is just to remember that I have this awesome duty owed to God to raise my children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That's children are never dying souls whom God has entrusted to us. The one other thing, though, I try to remember with that is that I try to remember that I'm not responsible for my child's salvation, that's in God's hands. And I just want to exercise my duty owed to God.
That's good. So if you have a notable quotable you'd like us to talk about sometime, feel free to put it in the chat. I want to continue talking about what Kevin just shared with us. So if you have any comments, Julie, let us know. But that quote, when I read it, reminded me of a story a long time ago when CC was just getting started. I went to visit a community, and the director, when I was there, said, "You need to meet this mother that's here at our organization." And so I was like, okay, people always want me to meet people, I'll meet her. So I met her and I said, "Well, I heard that you're a pretty interesting person. Why am I meeting you?" And she said, "Well, it's probably because people like my testimony. We had 4 children, 3 of which died in separate accidents." And I just looked at her and said, "I don't know how you're still standing," right? And she said, "And that's what I want to share with you, is that through that, I realized that not a one of those was ever my children. They were all God's children. And my only job was to pour the Holy Spirit into them as much as I could and give them the opportunity for the Lord to be part of their lives for as long as I was allowed to, and to be grateful for every minute I have with them." And so stories like that really, where people have learned the hard way that our children are undying souls that live forever. It should be obvious to us, and yet it's not, is it?
Mm.
Anyway, so she was a very faithful person. All right, so we're going to begin our book club discussion. Feel free to turn on your camera and chat questions and comments at the bottom of the screen, while our producer Julie Melendez will help guide us through the chats. But before we do that, Kevin, tell us about our guest. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed by my background now that Kerry has his lawyering Supreme Court background there. So, but Kerry is a friend of mine. I'll admit, I don't talk to him that often, but in ministry, oftentimes, and you have other people that are rowing in the same direction, you feel like, okay, those people are my friends. And Kerry is one of those people for me. We have a mutual friend in Jeffrey Tumala, who is a professor of law at Liberty University School of Law. And when I first got involved with education issues in my third year of law school, I went to Professor Tumala and he told me about Kerry. So I reached out to him, and ever since then we've interacted. We've been to a homeschool convention together that was up in Michigan. I think it's Inch up in Michigan several years ago. Kerry is an attorney. He practices in Michigan, and he attended Regent University School of Law and is licensed in Virginia and Michigan. I think he and his wife, having lived in Virginia for a number of years, I think that's really obvious that they are very informed about Virginia history. And that mattered to me when I was reading his book, Real Choice, Real Freedom. So Kerry did author 2 books, Real Choice, Real Freedom, and American Education. You can see the green one there on the screen. And then just lately, I think it was just a few months ago, Kerry, Origin of Civil Government. And you can see by the cover really what that book is about. And Kerry can talk a little more about that here in just a bit. And then he also writes for the Lonang Institute, Lonang being Law of Nature and Nature's God Institute. That's at lonang.com. And Kerry, if I'm not mistaken, that was a project that you started with, amongst other people, Herb Titus. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, Jerry Thompson, another attorney here in Michigan, started that site. I had my own called Reviving the American Republic, which we later merged into Jerry's site. And then because we both studied under Titus, we got Herb to give us permission to reprint many of his documents on that site that attempt to explain the law of nature and nature's God in the American experience and what it meant, its biblical origins and implications for law. We also have a number of amicus brief we've filed in several cases in the Supreme Court listed on that site for those that like to read that sort of thing.
Well,
So I want to know, Kevin, can you tell us who Herb Titus is? I don't think we know.
Sure. So Herb Titus was basically I should say, a legal beacon for many of us. And he, as I know, I don't know as much about Herb as Kerry does, but Herb Titus basically was a Christian legal advocate, and he would go around and speak and write. And he did some work with Rousas Rushdoony many years ago. But Herb Titus was just around for many years leading the Christian legal movement. And Kerry, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, Herb, I came to know him when he became the dean of the Regent University, then CBN University, School of Public Policy. And then later when the university basically inherited a law school, he became the first dean of that law school and worked through fighting the ABA, the American Bar Association's corporatocracy, pagan corporatocracy to make all the law schools, atheistic. And he was successful in resisting that and getting accreditation. So he's a scholar and studied with Francis Schaeffer and Labrie a couple of years. And so he just passed away actually last year, and we were able to reproduce many of his earlier writings on our website. So
Kevin, I was
Oh,
like,
go ahead.
Kerry has brought up a lot of words I'd like to get more understanding of. You want to jump in and start asking them questions?
Sure. I did want to ask you first, and obviously this is relevant to the context that we're discussing about my book, Abolition. And you wrote the book, Real Choice, Real Freedom in American Education. And can you just give us, so that we can ask you some more questions about that, can you just give us a broad overview about what that book is about?
Sure. Now I'm getting paid by the hour, right? So take a long time here.
Take what you need.
Take what you need.
All right. Well, I wrote Real Choice, Real Freedom in American Education, and it was published by University Press of America in 1997. And that book does a couple things, but its thesis is that parents have the unalienable God-given right to direct the education and upbringing of their own children, and more importantly, to do so free from state interference and control. That includes state, local, federal, governmental interference and control. And that parents have this right to, as against those who would attempt to regulate them or prescribe curriculum or mandate hours or any of this sort of thing, any of the typical regulatory scheme associated with government control of education. They have a right from God to do so free from any of these things, and are accountable to God himself for their discharge, whether faithful or unfaithful. But it's unto God unto whom they owe this accountability, not to the State Board of Education or the Superintendent of Public Instruction or their neighbor. So that's the thesis of the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book deals with the expansion of federal jurisdiction over education, going back to the Bureau of Education after the Civil War as a statistical organization and the Constitution's census power, which has been expanded since then by just about every president of whatever political party to expand the role and the presence and the power of the federal government to control schools and education in the states, not just in the District of Columbia and in the Indian reservations and on tribal lands in the early 20th century, which were, of course, colossal failures that we're still living with today. So it shows how this any education, federal education, and the Department of Education now under Jimmy Carter, brought in by Jimmy Carter, is really completely without any constitutional basis, and was expressly rejected by all of the framers and the founders and the founding fathers and all the presidents up through James Buchanan. So that's the second part of it. And I guess philosophically, the third thing to mention about this book, which is a unique Virginia contribution, is I have an analysis of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson's work in Virginia during the colonial and post-colonial period after the Revolution to disestablish the state control of the church. As you may know, before the Revolution, the Anglican Church was the official church of the Commonwealth of the colony. And it had its classic 4 elements of establishment. This is how do you know an establishment when you see it. Number 1, it had compulsory attendance. Everybody was required to attend to their local Anglican church on the Sabbath. It was a civil offense not to do so. It resulted in a payment of fines, which typical in Virginia meant that you had to take some of the tobacco you were raising and pay your minister in tobacco, which was the cash equivalent. Number two, it had approved doctrine. Ministers could only teach out of the Book of Common Prayer. That was the approved doctrine, approved by the state. Number three, you had certification of the ministers. Only those ministers that were Orthodox, in the sense they were approved by the Anglican Church, could preach. Dissenters and like Presbyterians and Baptists, which were the biggest opposition, they were outlawed. They had banned. They couldn't preach and teach at least in the eastern part of Virginia, this side of the Appalachian. And then you had number four, compulsory financial support. So you had to pay your tithe to the government, and then would distribute the tithe among state-approved churches, which was the Anglican Church. And what I did is I analyzed each of these four elements and then said, how does this square with our modern state establishments of religion? And well, here in Michigan, we have compulsory attendance. You have to be in attendance 181 days, or it's a misdemeanor in Michigan not to have your children in attendance. Also, every city and local village has civil infractions. So there's fines of $50 up to $500 for not having your children in attendance. They also have compulsory licensure of teachers. The teachers' unions are very strong and exclude just normal people. And if you homeschool your children, it used to be in the early days that was prohibited unless you had a degree from a state-approved college. And I worked with HSLDA to try to qualify people that before our Supreme Court struck all that down. And of course, you have compulsory taxation. Your money is sent to teach doctrines that without regard to whether you approve of them or not, called the public school curriculum. And of course, the curriculum is defined by the state legislature in state law, commanding the subjects which shall be taught in a public school and in a private school and in a government-controlled homeschool. There are no free schools in Michigan except those that completely ignore the government, with impunity, essentially. But all the schools are regulated to some degree or another. And so that was a very powerful argument that the same principles that warranted the disestablishment of the state church must invariably lead to the same result with the disestablishment of the state control over education. And we could get into more questions about that as to why that is such a difficult proposition to hear in any pulpit in this country, let alone in any church, let alone when you're having a nice dinner conversation at a church potluck and the people you're sitting with is our principal and this guy's a teacher and his mother's a second grade teacher and they're the sweetest and nicest people in the world. And you start out with how are you doing in serving your masters in Lansing? It's always a fun time was had by all. So
Well,
yeah,
I think that happened to me like a week ago. So that those conversations can be uncomfortable, but they have to be had. Before we open it to questions, if you don't mind, I just want to ask you about a little more about the Anglican Church in Virginia being disestablished, because I rely heavily on this analogy in my book. And I want to ask you, people are obviously familiar with James Madison and people are obviously familiar with Thomas Jefferson. Can you just tell us what their roles were in the disestablishment of the Anglican Church in Virginia.
Sure. The Da Capo Press, I think, have several interesting books about this in reprint. I can provide those names later if you wish, but essentially the Baptists, the dissenters, the nonconformists, they talked to James Madison and expressed their concern that, you know, their people were being thrown in jail, their ministers were being thrown in jail, and that under a prior deal with the former governor, Governor Gooch, the Presbyterians were allowed to have their own services on the other side of, in the western part of Virginia, because they couldn't get any official approved Anglican ministers to travel over into the wilderness to conduct their churches. It was just too far into the wilderness, and so the Presbyterians kind of got left alone. But the Baptists, they kept talking about this thing called soul liberty, S-O-U-L. They needed soul liberty, and to them that meant the freedom to worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience, not of the conscience of Caesar or of an Anglican minister or anybody in the government or associated with the government. So at that time, the payment of tithes to the government only went to the Anglican Church. So Madison introduced a bill to make provision for teachers of the Christian religion. And in his bill, he said, you know, there's a lot of Christians other than just the Anglican Church. There's these Baptists and there's these Presbyterians, and yeah, we're not talking about anybody else, not those Quakers up in Pennsylvania, and certainly not any Jewish religions, and nothing, no Catholic religion like up in Pennsylvania. They can have their own establishments, but let's sort of broaden the pie. Let's allow the Presbyterians and the Baptists essentially to put their hand into the state treasury and draw on it to support their ministers on equal basis. And problem solved, right? Spread the money around. Well, the Baptists didn't think that was such a great idea because they didn't want to be dependent on the state. And so there was some concern about that, and maybe there's a larger thing afoot. So Madison came back and he ended up drafting a very famous document called Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, I believe, Memorial and Remonstrance. And the Memorial and Remonstrance was a legal argument, like a 40-some paragraph legal argument as to why submission of religion to the arms and machinery of Caesar was a bad idea. Not just a bad idea because it resulted in some inequality of funding, but it was a bad idea because God himself made the mind free. And this concept, Almighty God created the mind free and manifested his will that free it should remain by making it altogether insusceptible of restraint, which is a beautiful 18th century prose, which nobody really knows what I just said. So, but it's a way of saying God made the mind in such a way that it can't be subject to external coercions upon it to force it to be changed. The individual could say, I don't believe that anymore, but in their heart of hearts, their mind still believes it, and it can't get to it. And so he used this idea of God making the mind free to conclude that it should be free in the affairs of religion and how a man worships his maker according to the dictates of his own conscience. So this became circulated. It became very popular, became a rallying cry. Jefferson came along and said, oh, that's good, but the natural implications of that are the disestablishment of the state church. And so he introduced a bill for religious freedom, which is a very famous I believe 1786, a very famous bill that took this idea of Almighty God created the mind free, and he used that to essentially disestablish the state church, get the church out of the business, the government out of the business of religion. And in the ensuing decades, all of the land which had been given by the government to the church, they called them glebe properties, the glebe estates, Glebe. These were put up for auction and sold to whoever wanted to buy them. And dissenter congregations bought them or nobody bought them. It didn't matter. They got out of the business. So this took a couple generations to actually fully disestablish. And I printed a fly cover for my green book there, which I have not here, but it's in other editions that I send out to people. And on it is in the background, it's land for sale. And it's your public schools are for sale. They're all for sale. They're up for sale. Because after all, they are no more subsidized. And while many people continue to send their children to their local school because that's where they went and that's where their parents went and that's what America's all about. Yeah, there you go. It's sort of in the faded background there. But it's like one day, the eventual effect of a disestablishment is the sale of those properties to people that want to join together. If they wish to join together, free from the government, they may certainly do so.
Julie, do we have any questions we want to cover from the chat?
We have no questions yet. I just typed in thinking of some questions. I'll start. I know I think these are, like you said, and church members. I mean, even fellow homeschoolers. And as we're out, Leigh, in the country, talking about just this idea of civil government. What are some ways that you have found to have these tough conversations with people that are just going through the motions because it's what we've always done and they've never contemplated the actual freedom of what you're talking about? Can you share some maybe examples of how you can handle that church conversation?
The ones I haven't been asked to leave, those ones? Well, I will tell you, it's extremely difficult to just jump in with anyone who is employed by the public school. And that's not because they're bad people or anything. It's simply because usually their pension is tied up with the whole thing. Their mortgage, they have to pay their mortgage. They have to live. They have their children go to the school. They are involved in the school. They're active in the school. Yes, they may not like, from a Christian point of view, that it's teaching this curriculum or that curriculum, but they don't see a problem with it teaching a curriculum. They don't see it as a first order question of whether or not Caesar should be in the business of compelling children to attend a school in which they are forcibly exposed to government approved ideas. And unless you phrase it in such a direct and blunt manner, it's all, well, you believe what you want and I'll believe what I want. And, I guess, I refer to the curriculum as a curriculum of practical atheism. I refer to God not being in the school as a, I think, Kevin, you and I wrote that article, can the truth be taught in a public school? And the answer is it cannot be taught in a public school. So people want to talk about curriculum. That's kind of a dead end, because as bad as curriculum is, they know Mrs. Smith, who teaches little Johnny in 3rd grade, and she's an elder's wife, and she's a nice person, and she would never teach this kind of stuff. And if she did, she would call me on the phone and let me know that I should object to that. So people do not accept, or they have never been exposed to the idea that that they have conceded to the state the power to compel their child to be forcibly sat in a school for 180 days a year, 6 hours a day for 12 years, and be exposed to a practical atheist curriculum. And it's not, many of these are not anti-God. They don't get up every morning and say God doesn't exist. But if you and I knew each other and we talked every day for 12 years and I've ever mentioned God and it never came up, you might get the conclusion that he's irrelevant. And so that's the default assumption, that if God exists, he's irrelevant. We don't even need to talk about him. And I send my kids to Sunday school. They get 45 minutes of Sunday school every week, and that's enough to outbalance any atheism they're getting with their peers, which is it's very difficult to have these conversations. But I usually find that my legal training is much more effective when I don't make statements, but I ask questions.
That's right.
I would encourage you to develop the art of the question. We're all taught we have to have a reason to defend our faith. And I want a reason. The other guy even believes what he believes. So I'd like to ask questions like, now, what is it that do you think the government should compel children to be exposed to government approved ideas? Yes or no? And it's like, most people say, that's terrible. That's what they did in Russia. And I said, well, now, how is that different than a public school that you teach in? Well, let's not make it personal. So
that's good.
That's one thing. You have to ask questions. You can't, and it may be like 3 times, 4 times you have these conversations and you never, ever make a statement, because you're trying to figure out what really makes the other person tick and why they believe so much in it. And it might come down to this. Yeah, I heard everything you said, but it's a job. I need a job.
Right. That's right.
And, my kids go there because I can keep an eye on them, and, my spouse works and we can't educate our kids at home. And this is the life we have. And it's a pretty good life. And I might just add, I'm sorry, I have to add this. I've been in many churches where there's the usual graduation sermon where the minister talks about the children now graduating and going on to college or trade school or employment, and talks about the great track record of kids from our church. They don't lose their faith. They don't when they go off to college. And then parents are shocked when their kids are sleeping around or carousing or doing the things college students do. They're shocked that little Jill and little Bobby would be doing these things. But the sobering question is, well, what have they been taught for the last 12 years? Did they tear down? Did you help your children put on the mind of Christ? Did you work with them to tear down every vain argument that sets itself up against the knowledge of God? Did you renew your mind? Is that part of what you did? If you didn't, just sending your kids to college is just, I don't know, is that for your parental vanity? So you can say to your friends, my kid didn't just get a job. My kid went to school. And, so I don't know, that seems like just an endless cycle of problems that, what did you really expect? You gave your children's mind away to nice people, but they were legally prohibited from teaching the truth about anything. They couldn't teach math from God's point of view. They couldn't teach history. They couldn't say anything.
So I have a question for you for a legal perspective. So a lot of our people that aren't on our side, but are Christians or conservatives, are really excited about the expansion of the vouchers to the New England state, where they don't have public schools in certain areas and they only have private schools. And they're like, so that's discriminating against our kids. So now they have full funding of the private schools in a number of counties. And unfortunately, it was defended by First Liberty, which is generally a good friend to us. Do you know what happened there and what arguments we can have with the Christian, you said Christian legal advocate. It seems like even the ones who are on our side don't understand the disestablishment principles you're talking about.
Right. I can't comment on that particular development. I do have a section I book on vouchers.
Mhm.
And I say vouchers is merely a funding issue, but it's not a disestablishment issue. It's not a control. It's still government control, right? I
Sure.
mean, we say private schools, but we really mean state regulated private schools. In Michigan, there's the Private and Parochial School Act that covers non-public schools. We have our exemptions for homeschooling that still are required to teach certain subjects. And you may say, oh, these are good subjects. Well, that's not for anyone to decide except the parents. But what about parents who won't teach their children, and by the time they graduate, they can neither read nor write? You mean like most of the public school students in some of Detroit schools? Those, what do we do with those teachers? You can't sue a teacher for educational malpractice in this state. That's already been shot down, but you can claim a parent's truant and take the child away. But back to vouchers, vouchers don't solve anything. Vouchers is what James Madison called a bill to expand provision for teachers of the Christian religion. It's back to James Madison's remedy to merely expand the financial subsidy of government control of education. And so it's not doing anybody any good. In Michigan, we have something more insidious than that. It's called the Parent Public School Partnership. And what happens is the homeschooling co-ops, who are free and unregulated, because generally they come under the legal shelter of a church and are a ministry of a church by and large, and not subject to the vagaries of the public board of education or the state board of education. They're free, but what they're doing now is the public schools have stopped fighting homeschooling per se, and they say, great, have your private school, do what you want, but when you get into high school, you may not offer chemistry, and you may not offer literature, and you may not offer these courses. Here's what we'll do. We will pay, and I FOIA'd several of these organizations and found out what we're talking about. We were talking about $60,000 a month paid out of the public school treasury to a homeschooling organization here in Michigan, based on a flat amount based on the number of parents whose children are dually enrolled. So the kid is online and he takes the class online, and if there's 16 classes, he has to be in attendance at 12 of them for the state to report, for the school district to report to the state. He's enrolled in a public school, send us $12,000, which is the annual, or $10,000 a head. So when you do the math, basically, if a public school can report that your homeschooler is in my school, I get money from the state. Then I take 50% and I put it in my budget at my school, and I take the other 50% and I send it to the homeschool organization, and suddenly the homeschool organization all has paid staff with nice benefits, and they actually end up charging tuition in excess of that to their parents who don't know what's going on. And it's just a perversion of the whole thing. And suddenly the homeschool co-op begins to look like the machinery, the administration, the top heavy administration of a public school. So that's the same thing. It's just vouchers by a different name. It's just, we're back to Madison's first bill to expand the monopoly, but it's still a monopoly.
Yeah, you can't defeat socialism with socialism or Marxism with Marxism. So when you expand that, all you're doing is expanding the bad thing you were trying to avoid.
Right.
Um,
Margaret Thatcher said, pretty soon you run out of other people's money too.
yeah, that's a good quote to remember. Okay, so you were. So what about maybe one more question? Does someone else have a question? I got one more and we're getting close to the end. Is there something, Julie, someone asked?
No, Sadie just has some really good points that she's pulling out. Page 29, is that from Abolition, Sadie? Or is that one of his books that you have? One of
It's
Kerry.
Abolition. It's 129. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. No, some good points there.
Okay. Yeah, so you didn't have a question, you're just pointing it out to us.
Oh, I'm very interested in the effect of the infiltration of the civil government into homeschooling through the Trojan horse of financing, which is what he was just talking about. And also he writes in his book about that we have to understand what the civil government is. It's a mechanism of enforcement or use of force. And then he talks right after that, the idea that the Christian as a civil government agent, that it's not right to enforce Christianity. So it was specifically dealing with, I think, Mr. Novak, you were talking about the Christian in the public school, being light and salt in the school and acting as a government agent. So either they're espousing secular humanism as a religion or Christianity. And if they can't do Christianity, then they are espousing the socialist secular humanism.
Well, and even if they do espouse it, if their paycheck is from an organization that has said you're not supposed to be doing it, then they're a bad employee and should be fired. The other one that I always hear is, I'm a missionary as a teacher in the schools, and I'm like, okay, every missionary I know raise their own funding. Who's sending you your paycheck before you call yourself a missionary?
I tend to agree with all that. People say, well, if I'm not there, then the children have no positive influence. I said, oh, it's like a ministry. Yes, it's a ministry. I said, it's a prison ministry. Your people are there by compulsion of the state. And if they don't go, they send the truant officer out and he says, you better come or I will essentially arrest, or I'll ticket your parents. And I've attended many truancy hearings. So this is not just theoretical. And, the judge says you either have little Johnny in the school and at this time, or I will issue an arrest warrant for you, or worse things will happen to you. And ultimately you can be charged with a misdemeanor. But, to the Christian who thinks, well, I'm doing a good thing. Yeah, I'm glad you're doing a good thing. Do it on your own time and, set it up at your house in the evening and see how many students voluntarily come. You have a captive audience. This is more of akin to a prison ministry where prisoners are there and they can't leave. They are there and that's it. I also wrote an article entitled, it dealt with the practical consequences of parents sending their children to a government school that have nothing to do with the curriculum. It's a way of showing how the family's autonomy to organize itself is severely affected. So much so that, when do your children get up? Do they get up when mother and father want them to get up? No, they get up because the government says they have to be at a place at a certain time. And when do they go to bed? And what do they do in the evening? Do they spend it according to the will of the mother and father? No, they have to do a homework. And what about holidays and vacations? Well, you have to work around the government's schedule. You can't, as a family, decide what you want to do. I'm going to have my children, we're going to go on a field trip. We're going to go here. Well, you can't do that on a Wednesday. They have to be in school. So I don't think people really realize how much the family has lost here. Even if the public school taught Jesus Christ is the Son of God 5 days a week, 24 hours a day, it's still, first of all, who is Caesar to declare what is true and false? Caesar has no authority to compel anyone to be exposed to a good or a bad curriculum, period. That's why I don't really argue much about curriculum, because it's about the use of force and violence. You know, if you don't attend my good curriculum, I'll put your parents in jail. If you don't attend my bad curriculum, I'll put your parents in jail. That's the real crime here.
Yeah, I have a friend who homeschools his 5 kids, and he said to me, do you know why I homeschool? And I was like, no. He said, because if my kids went to school, there's 5 of them and they'd have 6 teachers, and that's 30 adults I'd have to answer to in order to raise my family. And I refuse to do it.
That's exactly right. Good
Mhm.
point. Plus the social workers, the nurses, the physicians, the peer pressure, the counselors, all of course knowing far more superior what your child needs, even if they don't know their middle name or their favorite color or never had a conversation with them.
Mm.
Well, so Kevin, we're about out of time. Is there something you want to end with?
Well, I just want to encourage our participants to keep reading. There's so much out there. Read Kerry's book. As I mentioned, I think in week 1, that when we hear things from different people in different ways, I think that is so beneficial to us. And I hope our participants and anyone who watches these book club shows hereafter just benefits from what I've said and then what Kerry has said and puts it all together. And I just want to thank Kerry for coming on and thank our participants. Keep reading.
Yeah, so I want to close with this thought. Kevin's introduced us to some fundamental principles, to some Bible verses, to Kerry, to some ideas that really do sound hard and harsh to our friends and neighbors that we might want to talk to about this. I would really love it if next week we could talk about just if we could pray together and be repentant and figure out how within our own lives, what are we actually doing to make Christianity a potential reality for our neighbor? How are we loving them? Because it doesn't do a bit of good to put things down. It's the goodness of God that woos men unto him. So I hope that's what we can talk about next week. Is that good, Kevin?
That sounds great. I look forward to it, Leigh.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Kerry.
Okay,
Thank you, Kerry.
Bye, everybody.